What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to another Battle of the Bow Sights, where we score two sights based on their specs and features. Now in today's video, we're going to be comparing the Dialed Arxos up against the HHA Ryz to see who has the better overall design. Now, just like all of our Battle of the Bow Sight videos, let's go ahead and knock out what type of similarities that these sights have in common. Both the Arxos and the HHA Ryz are constructed of 6061 aluminum. Both of them are what I would consider high-end bow sights. Both of these sights are going to give you the ability to level them out on the second and third axis. Both of them have micro adjustability on the windage, but your elevation on both of these sights is going to be a macro adjustment. And obviously both of these sights are slider sights, giving you the ability to shoot longer distances if that is something that you prefer. Now, from a direct-to-direct comparison, that's where these similarities really stop with the Dialed Arxos when compared to the HHA Ryz. The next thing that I want to talk about, though, is the finish on both of these. Now with the HHA Ryz, being that both of these are constructed of 6061 aluminum, it's very standard in the archery industry to just get a sight that is anodized. Now if you look at the Dialed Arxos sight, you can see that they went with a Cerakote finish, which is really how Dialed Archery is able to provide their consumers with very unique color options. Now when comparing the Cerakote versus the anodizing process, when you do an anodizing process, the chemicals that are used to add the anodized finish to it does change the properties of aluminum and does fatigue it, whereas a Cerakote finish does not. It actually allows the aluminum to maintain its structural integrity, making it a little bit more durable. So just due to the fact that this is an aesthetically more pleasing sight, being that you do get that added durability because of the Cerakote finish and it not having an impact on the structural integrity, I'm going to give a point over to the Dialed Arxos. Now the next topic that we're going to talk about is the scope housing on both of these sights. Now as you can see on the HHA Ryz, I do have the UV smaller scope housing, but we're going to be talking about the standard scope housing that would come on this if you purchase this brand new. So when comparing those two scope housings together, they're both very similar in size, but the Dialed Arxos is a little bit bigger. And one thing that they decided to do differently was move that bubble to the top of the scope housing, whereas the HHA Ryz has it installed on the bottom like they do on all traditional sights. The HHA Ryz, and I've mentioned this before in my initial review video of the Ryz, that bubble is very oversized. In my opinion, it is way too big. So in that sense, I am going to give another point over to the Dialed Arxos. So when it comes to adjusting the brightness of the fibers, the HHA Ryz has implemented their mechanical rheostat, which is a cover on the scope housing that you either pull towards your peep to allow light in or move away from your peep to close light off. If you look at the Dialed Arxos just has a slide that is on the top. Again, you move the slide towards your peep to close off light and then move it away from your peep to add light to those fibers. Now, the one thing that I do not like about the mechanical rheostat on the HHA Ryz is when you pull that scope or that mechanical rheostat closer to your peep, it actually changes the appearance of the scope housing in your peep at full draw. At least it does for me, whereas the slide obviously has no impact on the way that that scope housing looks inside your peep at full draw. So again, being that it maintains that consistency every time you're at full draw, I'm going to give another point over to the Dialed Arxos. Now the next topic that I want to talk about is how you micro adjust both of these sights. As I already mentioned, the elevation on both of these sights is a macro adjustment, and that is one thing that I actually really like about both of these sights. They have what they call, and this is where a lot of the design features kind of cross over, is you can see that both of them have like an infinite elevation adjust. Dialed Arxos is calling it their AES system. HHA Ryz is calling it an infinite adjust system, giving you the ability to have a very wide range of adjustment up and down. So what that does is it gives you the ability to use this sight all the way from a kid's bow all the way up to an adult bow that has higher speed settings. Now, when it comes to the micro adjust for the windage, the Dialed Arxos actually has a set screw that is located on the bottom of the windage knob, and you're gonna have to unlock that to basically make your windage adjustment left and right. Now I will say that once you unlock that, the clicks to adjust the windage are very fine. You can really micro dial this thing in, and this is where HHA actually has, in my opinion, a little bit better of a design, is they have a toolless method to do not only the macro adjustment but also the micro adjustment. You can see that they have just this lever on the front here. You can go ahead and crack this lever and make a couple adjustments, which makes it a lot easier to adjust in the field. Whereas the Dialed Arxos, like I said, you would have to have an Allen wrench with you to unlock that and then go ahead and make that adjustment. So with that being said, I am going to give a point over to the HHA Ryz. Now, when it comes to adjusting your second axis on both of these sights, according to HHA, you can level out this sight at the bow shop. You can level out your second axis, your third axis, and then you can go home and you can move this scope housing on this infinite elevation slider and not have to worry about redialing in your second axis. Now, I can say that in my experience was not true. If I crack these two screws and I move this scope housing, their tolerances are a little bit tighter when compared to the Dialed Arxos design, but it still does require you to go back in and re-level out your second axis. Now, with the Dialed Arxos, you have to sight in your 20-yard pin and then you're going to make your adjustment. You can see that they have like an egg-shaped design on the bottom of the scope housing mount, and that's actually how you're doing your second axis adjustment. If you were to make that second axis adjustment before sighting in your 20-yard pin, once you start moving this up and down the slide, you're without a doubt going to throw off that second axis. But like I said, both of them do require you to sight in at 20 and then go back in and do your second axis adjustment. Now, when it comes to adjusting the third axis on both of these sights, the Dialed Arxos does require a little bit more effort when compared to the HHA Ryz. The Dialed Arxos is actually going to require you to dial out your windage knob all the way to the left if you're a right-handed shooter, and that's going to expose those set screws for you to do a micro adjustment on your third axis. Now, in my experience, being that I have this windage knob basically all the way to the right to get my left and right dialed in, when we dialed out the windage to the left, we still didn't have enough room to get an Allen wrench in there to micro adjust that. So basically what we had to do is unlock both of these set screws, make that macro adjustment to push the scope housing out more so we could access those and then bring it all back in. Like I said, it does require a little bit more effort and was a little difficult at the bow shop. Now, if you compare that over to the HHA Ryz, the HHA Ryz, their third axis adjustment is basically right on the dovetail or right behind the whole scope housing mechanism or slider mechanism, and it is truly a micro adjustment with the HHA Ryz, and this is the same as the black gold, and this is one feature that I do really like, but it gives you the ability to shoot in your third axis, being that you have that micro adjustment right there. You can take downhill shots or uphill shots, and if you see yourself hitting left or right of your target, then you can go ahead and dial that thing in and get that thing set. So from an easeability aspect, I am going to give a point over to the HHA Ryz. But another thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the third axis adjustment is the durability that you are going to get with the Dialed Arxos, being that the Dialed Arxos is basically protecting that third axis adjustment in that windage knob. It is making it an overall more durable bow sight. Whereas if, again, you take a look at the HHA Ryz, where they have that third axis adjustment is at a vulnerable spot of the sight. If you were to happen to make a fall out in the field, or if you were to happen to accidentally drop your bow, it would be very easy for you to accidentally torque this and throw that third axis setting off. So in that sense, I am going to give a point over to the Dialed Arxos just for having better overall durability on that setting itself. Now, shifting over to your slide wheel on both of these sights, both of them are texturized. Both of them are a little bit larger when compared to some of the other sights that are available on the market. But as you can see on the Dialed Arxos, it is a much larger wheel when compared to any other sight on the market. It has a very unique design, which helps this sight kind of stand out. Now, both of these sights, these wheels do make it very easy to sweep through the full range of the sight. Now, on the HHA Ryz, they do have their windage knob or micro adjustment knob for your windage positioned a little bit farther away from the wheel, which does make it a little bit easier to go through the full range of your sight tape. But with the Dialed Arxos, you can see that that is a little bit closer. Now, it's just something that you're going to have to get used to. I can tell you right now, I don't have any problem with going through the full sweep or the full range of the sight tape with just one turn of this wheel. I don't feel like it's positioned in a spot that's actually hindering you from making that adjustment. Now, the one thing that is different between these two sights is, as you can see on the HHA Ryz, they have their yardage wheel located on the right side of the sight if you're a right-handed shooter. Now, coming from a hunting perspective, I do prefer to run that on the left side, because if you are at full draw and you have to reference where your second pin is at, you can go ahead, come off your string, peek down your bow, and quickly make a reference on where that second pin is if that animal happens to make a move on you. Now, you don't have the ability to shift this to the left or the right like you do with the Dialed Arxos. The Dialed Arxos is giving you the ability to customize if you want your dial wheel or your sight tape on the left side of the bow or the right side of the bow. So in that sense, I am going to give another point over to the Dialed Arxos, just giving you the ability to further customize this for how you like to shoot. Now, in the sight-in video that I did for the Dialed Arxos, if you guys haven't watched that, I'll put a thumbnail up top so you guys can see what that one looks like. I'll put a link in the description below so you guys can check that video out. But in that video, when I went through the sight-in process, one thing that I did complain about a little bit was how tight their sight tape lines are. And if you compare that over to the HHA Ryz, the HHA Ryz has a very wide spacing in between each yardage marker, making it very easy to dial in the sight. There's no question on whether or not you're on the right yardage line, whereas the Dialed Arxos, it does take a little bit more effort to get that thing dialed in. Now, in that video, I said that I was going to test this out, and I ran this sight, and I've been shooting this sight now for probably about a month, and I've gone to multiple 3D events with this, and I do find it's not as difficult as I originally anticipated. It does take a little bit more attention for you to dial this in and get that precise yardage because those lines are so tight. So with that being said, I am going to give another point over to the HHA Ryz because I do like that their sight tapes offer that bigger gap. Another thing that I really like about the HHA Ryz is that they do give you the ability to have the longest sight tapes directly from the manufacturer. That is one thing that I've mentioned about the HHA Ryz previously before in some of my other videos. For me personally, I do not like purchasing subscriptions or going to outside manufacturers or outside companies to get sight tapes produced. I rather have that come directly from the manufacturer. It's just easier from a consumer standpoint. And I can say that I've shot the HHA Ryz with their longer sight tapes at all the way out to 120 yards, and the sight tape is very dialed, so they did a great job on achieving really good accuracy with these sight tape lines. Now, if you compare that over to the Dialed Arxos, all of their sight tapes, just like a lot of manufacturers, are stopping at 100 yards. They do have a custom sight builder on their website that you can go directly through the manufacturer on, which is unlike any other company. No other company offers that, but you still have to pay for that subscription, and you still have to walk this out all the way out to those longer yardages. So it does take a little bit more time if you're someone who's looking to get past that 100-yard mark. So with that being said, I am going to give another point over to the HHA Ryz for having, again, the longer sight tapes. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is how you're locking out both of these sights as far as the slider wheel goes. Now, with the HHA Ryz, you cannot shoot repetitive arrows or repetitive shots downrange without locking this sight. This sight will move on you as you start to shoot. They do have a nice locking lever located right on the right side of that roller wheel, but if I compare that over to the Dialed Arxos does not need a lock wheel and actually doesn't even come with one. They do include a dial brake, which increases the amount of tension required to move the slider wheel, but it's designed for you to be able to override that dial brake because they wanted this sight to basically always be ready in a hunting situation. You hear this time and time again where people are in the heat of the moment, they have their sight locked, they go to make an adjustment and they end up stripping it. You do not have to worry about that on the Dialed Arxos. Now, another unique thing about the Dialed Arxos is they give you the ability to tune this sight, so you can dial this thing in for exactly how you like the amount of tension required to slide this thing down. But if you are someone who is concerned about running a sight in the unlocked position, like I said, you do have that dialed brake, which increases the amount of tension by roughly 40% to roll the wheel. So with that being said, being that the Dialed Arxos is a set it and forget it style sight, it's always ready in a hunting situation, I am going to give them another point. Now, when it comes to the pin indicators on both of these sights, the Dialed Arxos is a little unique in the sense that they have a laser engraved line that represents your top pin. Now, shooting 3D with this sight, that's the only pin that I've used. And really, you can walk this sight all the way out to 100 yards with that top pin, which is very impressive. But that laser engraved line that is located on the actual sight itself makes it very easy to get those in between yardages, even with the sight tape lines being stacked so tight. Now, the one thing that I do not like about the Dialed Arxos is the fact that you have to manually adjust the position on your second and third pin. Whereas if I compare that over to the HHA Ryz, now keep in mind this is a 2-pin sight, my Arxos is a 3-pin, but their pins come pre-positioned through the manufacturer, so you don't have to make any adjustments. You're just gonna go ahead, sight this thing in, slap on your sight tape, and where your second pin ends or lies is going to be where your second pin falls on that sight tape. So I am going to give a point over to the HHA Ryz for having the better pin indicators. Now next, let's talk about slider rails on both of these sights. Now if you look at the HHA Ryz just has that traditional vertical slide rail like you'll see on all the slider sights that are available on the market. Whereas if you compare that over to the Dialed Arxos, they're actually using this angled elevation slide rail, which essentially moves the scope housing closer to the bow, allowing you to shoot longer distances. And then another benefit of that, as you start to slide down, your scope housing on traditional sights starts to appear a little bit smaller, but being that they're moving that scope housing in closer, it maintains consistency of the scope housing in your peep. So there is a lot of benefit that bakes into this. Now, one thing that I want to talk about in regards to these two sights is the Arxos team or the Dialed team is telling you that if you compare this sight versus whatever other sight you were running, you will be able to shoot an additional 30 yards on a sight tape because this is bringing it closer to your bow. Now, I will say that I have not been able to test this out for sure, and I'm basing this all off the spacing on my sight tape line. But if I look at my HHA Ryz, I lose clearance on my top pin at about 103 yards, 104 yards max. Whereas if I compare that over to the Dialed Arxos, I can roll well beyond 100 yards. Now, again, I haven't been able to test this out, but based off the spacing on my sight tape, I would say that you're probably going to be able to shoot your top pin all the way out to 120, if not 130 yards before you start to run in clearance, which is actually super impressive. So I do think that their design stands true and their statements to be able to shoot longer distances stands true with that AES system. But being that I have not tested this out, I want to be fair, and I'm just going to give both of these sights a point in regards to their slide rails. Now, this next point is 100% a personal preference point. I do think that the Dialed Arxos is a sick looking sight. I think this thing is very clean looking. I love the colors that they provide on this sight. I feel like it is very unique. It stands out from anything that is available on the market. So in that regards, I'm going to give a personal preference point over to the Dialed Arxos for just having a better overall aesthetic appeal on the sight itself. So in conclusion, you can see that the Dialed Arxos is coming in at 8 points versus the HHA Ryz that is coming in at 6 points, giving the Dialed Arxos the better overall design. Now keep in mind, and I already mentioned it in the beginning of this video, both of these sights are high-end bow sights. You can't go wrong with either option that you pick. The intent of this video is to be fun and just give you guys a better overall understanding of the specs, the features, and the pros and cons. I try to be as unbiased as possible throughout the scoring process. And I've ran both of these sights. I've ran the HHA Ryz actually a little bit longer than the Dialed Arxos. I ran this basically all summer, shot multiple 3D events, shot the Michigan Total Archery Challenge event with this sight, and I absolutely love the HHA Ryz, but there's a lot of things that the Dialed Arxos has brought to the industry in regards to some of the changes, and in my opinion, some much needed changes that really make this sight an outstanding option if you guys are looking to upgrade your sight. But that's going to be it for this video. If you guys have any other questions, you know you can always leave me a comment below. You know that you can reach out to me directly on Instagram. And if you guys have not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Your guys' support greatly helps us out, keeps us doing what we're doing. And until next time, stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you on the next one.